a moment to thank our sponsors. We, of course, appreciate their support. Our presenting sponsor is Comcast. Our supporting sponsors are CenterPoint Energy, Mortenson, and Xcel Energy. Our contributing sponsors are the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, MRA, the Management Association, Target, and US Bank. And our media sponsor is Finance and Commerce. So thanks to all of our sponsors. Now we're going to take a minute to hear from our presenting sponsor, Andrea Kyer, who's Manager for Government Affairs at Comcast. Andrea, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Grace. Comcast is excited to be supporting the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce's sponsor of the Legislative Breakfast Series. I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Comcast Rise. Comcast Rise is part of Project UP, Comcast's comprehensive initiative to advance digital equity, and was designed to help underrepresented small business owners with access to digital tools and funding they need to thrive. The program aims to uplift and support small BIPOC businesses hardest hit by the economic impacts of COVID-19. By the end of 2022, Comcast Rise will award 13,000 small businesses owned by women and people of color across the country with monetary grants, technology makeovers, and marketing services. In celebration of the one-year anniversary, Comcast Rise will expand to include women-owned small businesses nationwide in 2022, regardless of race or ethnicity. Applications open January 16th, and I encourage you to visit www.comcastrise.com. Thanks so much and enjoy the program.
Thanks so much, Andrea. We appreciate Comcast support and their commitment to our region. So now I'm going to hand it over to our moderator today, Christina Palladino, who is Senior Principal for Public Relations and Communications at Park Street Public, to introduce our elected officials.
Great. Thank you so much, Grace. Good morning, everyone. As Grace said, Christina Palladino here, Senior Principal of Media Relations and Communications at Park Street Public. I'm very honored to be moderating this great event as we get ready for the 2022 legislative session. So I'd like to go around and introduce our lawmakers that were so kind to join us this morning. We have Senator Melissa Wickland, Representative Steve Elkins, Senate Minority Leader Melissa Franzen, and Representative Michael Howard. And I'd like to start with a little round robin of everyone taking a minute or so to do a brief introduction of themselves and maybe just say a few words about why you're excited to be here this morning. Senate Minority Leader Franzen, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you all for joining us tonight, this morning. I really am excited to be part of this discussion. It's a yearly event where we get to chat about business, and some of you might know I'm a small business owner myself, so I understand a lot of the tensions and frustrations this last couple of years and all the challenges that we've had. So I'm looking forward to listening and getting some answers to your questions, and also giving you a little preview, if you will, a forethought of what the session is going to look like. But for those of you who do not know me, I represent Senate District 49, which is the communities of Edina, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, and Minnetonka. And with redistricting, that number and that district might change, but we will stay tuned for that. So thank you for having us, and look forward to the conversation.
Great. Senator Wickland?
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate being invited to attend again this year. And it's great to have this opportunity to be able to talk with other legislators, and then to interact with the Bloomington community and hear about issues that are of concern. And as we go into session, it's a great time to do that. I'm Melissa Wickland, and I'm state senator. I represent what is now Senate District 50, and it includes a lot of Bloomington and then about half of Richfield as well. So happy to be here and look forward to discussing all the topics. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Representative Howard?
Thanks, Christina. My name is Mike Howard, and I represent District 50A, and that serves Richfield and East Bloomington in the Minnesota House. And I am excited to be here this morning, and really appreciate how this event in the past has been such a great dialogue, a lot of ground we can cover. And boy, there's a lot of ground to cover as we start what should be a really exciting and hopefully productive 22 session.
Great. And Representative Elkins.
Thank you and good morning. Thanks for the opportunity. Steve Elkins, I represent House District 49B, which is kind of anchored on Western Bloomington, but also includes the southern precincts in Edina and small parts of Eden Prairie in Minnetonka. And I've had a long association with the chamber. I served as a city council member in Bloomington for 9 years. And during that whole time, I was the city's representative on the Bloomington Chamber's board, participated actively in the Minneapolis Regional Chamber's Public Policy Committee for a number of years. So I'm comfortable in this audience and happy to be here this morning.
Great, thank you so much. And please keep in mind, for those of you tuning in, we're definitely going to be taking your questions as we get through this discussion. So we love to have an interactive audience. I'll be reading them through the chat and getting questions from people to the lawmakers. So let's start off with our discussion here. Let's talk money. There is a lot of it here in Minnesota. I'd like to go around the panel and ask what we should be doing with a more than $7 billion surplus. Senator Franzen, let's start with you.
Well, that's the big question of this session. We have a $7.7 billion surplus. It doesn't include inflation, so it's closer to 6 million. But then we have options, right? We can save, we can invest or spend, or we can really, it's one-time money. So we have to be very cautious about what we do with this funding, meaning that we look at the budget in a biennium. So every 2 years, and whatever decisions we make this year will have repercussions in the tails, which is in the out years. So I sit on the finance committee. This is a committee where we're going to see every single piece of legislation that has any fiscal impact, and we're going to make those decisions. And I would say what we're hearing from our communities and our constituents is the economy, the cost of living, groceries, utilities, transportation, all of these costs have risen with inflation and with the pandemic and distribution issues. But we want to be making sure that people can afford living in our state, living in our communities, and reduce those burdens. So those are the issues that we're going to be looking first and foremost. And we certainly know that public safety is on everybody's mind. In my community specifically, we've had 3 carjackings in the last month, actually. So we know that we need to stop the crime and violence right now. So violence and crime prevention will be top of mind for us too.
Senator Wickland.
Thank you. Yes, it certainly is a substantial amount of money, and it's in a way it's a good, well, in many ways it's a good position to be in. We aren't in a position where we have to be making changes that will negatively affect people, but we have the opportunity to really have a positive impact on people in Minnesota. I guess my focus will be on priorities that will have the most impact on workers and families who have been most affected by the pandemic the last couple of years. People who are working on the front lines and working in essential jobs that are still really affected by day-to-day by COVID, and we need to find ways to support them as we make our way through this pandemic. I think that my priorities will be how do we address things like shortages in workforce in many of the care professions. We are facing shortages in childcare, shortages in the healthcare professions and long-term care. I'd like to see us find ways that we can address those needs. Also looking at ways to help families out with things like affordable housing and education needs. Our schools have been bearing a lot of the burdens of the pandemic, and we need to find ways to help support them as we move forward. So those are some of the priorities. It will be a challenge to figure out, and we'll have a lot of lively discussion about that over session. So thank you.
Representative Elkins.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's already been said here. Public safety is certainly going to be one of the focuses. Representative Adelson in Edina has been spearheading a group of suburban legislators who are working with mayors and police chiefs on issues related to public safety to address the current crime wave. And for my part on that, I'm supporting on working with the police chiefs, the Department of Public Safety, and other law enforcement stakeholders on seeing if there are ways to improve the reporting of crime data, support better analysis. Anytime there's a big issue and there's an IT angle to it, I get assigned that part of the task. I'm happy to do that. In terms of the budget, I think workforce is going to be huge, especially workforce in those areas where people are very dependent on personal care, so personal care attendants for people with disabilities, child care, school bus drivers, metro mobility drivers. Those people all need to get a pay raise because they're, the mantra used to be jobs, jobs, jobs. Right now it's workers, workers, workers. And when people are working in those demanding jobs and only getting paid $13, $14 an hour when they can earn, $15, $16 an hour flipping burgers at McDonald's, the turnover in those businesses is horrendous. And the number of open positions on these critical care positions is at a crisis level. Housing has always been a chamber issue, and I'll be supporting Representative Howard's efforts to secure more funding for both housing construction and rental assistance. For my part on that, I'm working on a bill that will be called the legalizing affordable housing bill, which is mostly about zoning reform to make it easier for affordable housing to be constructed. And I'm also kind of doing a side project on budget reform with this huge surplus we're looking at, as Senator Franzen alluded to. We include inflation on the revenue side in our budget, but not the cost side. And so I'm working with Minnesota Management and Budget, the state economist, House research on a bill that would finally reflect inflation appropriately on both sides of the ledger.
Great. Representative Howard.
We do have a historic budget surplus, but Minnesotans are facing historic economic challenges. And that, I think, must be at the crux of our work this session, is to listen and to meet Minnesotans where they're at. It has been a tough year and a half or 2 years, and a lot of the economic anxieties and stressors that families are facing remain present. And we need to focus on ways that families are being squeezed. And so when I think about that, let's focus on the top areas of family budgets and help relieve some of that stress. So I think about housing costs and the cost of rent and the cost of your home. Think about the cost of childcare and the access issues with making sure that there is a quality place for your child and childcare. And I think about the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs. To me, those three items are kind of the biggest priorities. And with this surplus, we can provide real, tangible economic relief that families will feel immediately, and that will help them cope with things like inflation. There are limited tools that the state legislature has to directly address inflation, but I would hope that any legislators that are worried about the spike in the cost of a gallon of milk will be worried about how much it costs for housing, for healthcare, and childcare. Those are things that we can make a big difference on. And so overall, I think that's our goal, is to listen to Minnesotans and deliver on the things that matter most to their budgets.
Great. Each of you mentioned public safety as a big concern. Obviously, some of the recent escalation in violence here has made national news in the Twin Cities. What are the best ways to address this critical issue so residents, business owners, and people who visit the Twin Cities metro area feel safe doing so? Representative Elkins, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I already mentioned the one initiative we have going, and said I've already met with basically have a team that's Department of Public Safety, Bureau of Corrections, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Police Chiefs Association, Minnesota IT Services. So we're working on ways to facilitate the flow of crime data easily among these agencies and our local police department. So these guys who are running around, carjacking cars, just stealing cars with the keys left in them. Please don't leave your keys in the car. That's 90% of the car thefts. And if you're going to do so, don't leave your dogs or your kids in the car. But these criminals are working across city lines, and so it's hard to identify the pattern so that police can proactively address these when they're stealing a car in St. Louis Park in the morning and Edina in the afternoon. So the role I'm playing is, and the League of Cities is actively involved in this. How do we make sure that law enforcement has all of the information they need to proactively address crime? I think we've seen one thing that experiment that failed that's been rolled back. District Attorney Freeman had put auto theft, nonviolent auto theft on the list of non-bail crimes. He's rescinded that decision, and that's certainly going to help. That if you steal a car, whether it's violent or not, you are going to have to post bail and spend probably some time in jail until it's posted. That's clearly been a blind spot. And you know, when nobody's going to defund their police, I represent parts of 4 cities, and all of them are you know, maintaining or improving the funding for their police as well, and we will support them. And we're supporting all of our suburban police chiefs in their efforts as well.
Senator Franzen, you mentioned, you know, in your district, there's been a number of issues. What are you hearing from your constituents, you know, families? There was a carjacking at a daycare, you know, a couple of weeks ago. What are some of the things you're hearing from families living in your area?
Well, Christina, mostly it's anger. People are angry that they're living this trauma, right? We have victims and people with little kids being put in harm's way, and we have to get at the root of the issue, right? One thing we have been doing, like Representative Elkins mentioned, is meeting with law enforcement. We have had many conversations. I've sat down with my chief of police in Edina because of these incidents and asked what they need from us, whether it's retention and recruitment and retention. But let's be real, that's not an immediate solution. We certainly want to support that, and we're looking ways to do that from the state coffers this year, but we also need to find the immediate solutions. And we know that a lot of our youth, and we know that some of the perpetrators have been younger individuals. That's no excuse of breaking the law, but what can we do to, instead of, as a friend of mine said, we shouldn't put them in a cell box, we should put them in a schoolhouse. And we need to make sure that the programs that are available, we're not going to recreate programs. There's been programs that have been underfunded and have closed for types of youth that have had crisis in their lives. And we know that youth intervention programs do work. I've actually been chief author of that bill since I started in the legislature in 2013. And we need to see how we can sustain that, how we can continue to improve upon evidence-based programs like youth intervention. And we also need to support our police and be outspoken about the respect that we have for our law enforcement. My dad was a police officer before I was born in Puerto Rico. I lived next to a sergeant, and I learned how to respect and the work and the value and what they put on the line every single day. But we also need accountability in the entire system, right? So that's the role of the legislature, and we have the post board, which we oversee and are working with. We've done a slew of list of reforms post the murder of George Floyd. We still will work on those, but I think right now what people want us to do is stop the violence and the crime that's happening in the streets right now. And it's going to be a multifaceted approach, and it has to be comprehensive, because it's not locking kids up and putting them through the criminal justice system. I'm also talking to judges that work in the juvenile justice system, talking to prosecutors and public defenders, because we need to hear from them. They're in the ground zero. And I've also heard from police officers that want us to just let them do their job and support them and stop with the negative rhetoric against law enforcement. So those are all comprehensive issues that we're going to be tackling, and I'm committed to doing that with my caucus.
Senator Wickland, how do you think we tackle this complex problem? Do we use some of the surplus money to fund these programs like Senator Franzen was saying?
Yeah, I think a lot of good ideas have been mentioned, and I would like to see us explore in the legislature putting greater support towards educational programs, as Senator Franzen mentioned. We know that if youth have access to programs where they can develop strong relationships with adults in the community and see themselves as being a part of the greater community, and having positive roles to play, and access to positive outcomes, jobs, and better support systems. So I would really like to see us be able to look into those programs. We know that there are, as she mentioned, there are programs that we know do work, and why not explore? I think that the approach that we're taking so far by gathering input from all of the people involved in the system is the right approach. And I hope to hear from many of those different aspects and, in terms of how we develop our solutions. Thanks.
Representative Howard, how do we make sure families feel safe going to the Mall of America? Or what are you hearing, from your families living in the Richfield, Bloomington area?
Yeah, I would agree with a lot of what's been discussed. I mean, I think we need to sort of have a approach to the legislature where we're focusing on solutions that we know that will work. And there are good solutions out there, and community-based programs focused on our youth and on crime prevention work. There was a recent study by the American Sociological Review that showed for every 5 nonprofit community organizations that were focused on this work in a city of 100,000 people, there was a 6% drop in the homicide rate and a 5% reduction in violent crime. And that's just one piece, but we in the legislature can do much more to support those community organizations. And we also need to continue to build goodwill and trust between our communities and law enforcement. When there are gaps in that community trust, that leads to citizens not calling the police if there's an issue in their community, and that doesn't help police, with their clearance rates to solve some of these crimes. And so, we've got an excellent police department here in Bloomington, and there, as Senator Franzen mentioned, we worked on some reforms, such as reforms to our arbitration process that do more to raise up the quality of the profession in policing and support the vast majority of our police officers that are serving admirably every day. And so those things need to be a focus. And the last thing I'd say, if we truly want to tackle this issue at the legislature, we should take the politics out of it. There's been no issue that has been politicized as much as public safety. And unfortunately, some people have seen the crime issue and their first reaction has been, well, this is a way to score political points against another political party. But as your question mentioned, there's probably no issue that regular folks view through a political lens than public safety. I don't care which party you support, you want your community, your family to be safe. Our constituents don't see this as a political issue, and we shouldn't at the legislature either. We should focus on the things we know will work and make a difference.
Right. This latest surge of the Omicron variant has caused yet more disruption to work, childcare, as you all were talking about, venues in the restaurant and entertainment industry. They're trying to figure out the best ways to adapt and keep going. How do we support people with safety nets like unemployment insurance and making sure those funds are there for folks who need it? Representative Elkins?
Yeah, sure. So I think the replenishing the unemployment insurance fund pool is going to be a priority. I fully support backstopping, using some of the surplus to refill that funds, especially so small businesses don't get stuck with a huge unemployment insurance tax increase. And unemployment will need to continue to be an important part of the overall social safety net and safety net for businesses. But the other thing is that Minnesota has always thrived in one of the reasons it's always thrived because our workforce participation rate has been one of the highest in the country, and one of the reasons for that is because I think we have long had the highest female workforce participation rate in the country. And that's where our current shortcomings on things like childcare, paid family medical leave are really impacting workforce availability, because moms are staying home with their kids because we have these school closures. There's a shortage of child care workers to support the child care industry. So all of those, unemployment is an important one leg of that stool.
Senator Wickland, you talked about this, schools, childcare, we're all kind of experiencing this right now. I'm home with my kids, trying to work, trying to make it all happen. Talk about what we can do to support, parents as they're just trying to navigate day by day with everything happening.
Yeah, it is such a challenging time. My kids are growing up, and I try to think about what it would have been like if my kids, were like your kids' age, and trying to deal with both working and, and parenting and being at home, and then making the constant decisions that parents are making about, what situations are safe and, how to keep their kids safe. It's just been an incredibly stressful 2-year period. And I thought that we would be in a different place at this point in January of 2022, but we're not. And so I think we need to, again, really apply ourselves to helping support families as we go through this. In terms of our legislative session, I hope that means looking at resources that we can make available to encourage more childcare providers to stay open, to be able to stay open, to give them the tools they need to be available for parents. Right now, due to federal money that we received last year, childcare providers are receiving extra stipends or extra amounts per employee they can apply for and receive per individual employee. And that was meant to help support the compensation for childcare providers, but it really is just a small dent in what is really needed to bring up the wages for people in this profession. So I would really like to see more funding go towards the wages and the efforts that are put into recruiting professionals into that field. Because I think stability in having access to childcare is such an important thing for families to know that they have a place to, safe place to take their kids that is high quality and that their kids are learning as well as being protected. So that is one of the big focuses for me for the upcoming session. Thanks.
Great. Senator Franzen, you have young children. What are some of your top priorities with how we address the childcare issue, the worker shortage, school issue?
Well, I have a 5 and a 6-year-old. We chatted about that earlier, and it's been tough, right? And we know that Minnesota is one of the most expensive places to pay for childcare. We're at the top tier with the first bracket, and that's not changed with COVID. In fact, it's gotten worse because of the worker shortage that Senator Wickland mentioned. And we've got a few tools in our arsenal to deal with that. There's tax credits, but that's only if you actually pay for childcare. But if you're talking about the working poor, they're disproportionately impacted by this pandemic, and they've had to stay home and not collect a paycheck if they're on an hourly wage, or have a harder time with their employment, or working the multiple jobs and not have any backup in family. And it also hurts our kids, right? We want them to be not just in a safe environment, but an educational environment. We know that the brain development, and 90% of it happens before they're age 5. I'm a big believer in the early childhood scholarship model. I would support some of that surplus to continue to help families be allowed to put their 3 and 4-year-olds into those programs that are evidence-based and that our return on investments is proven. And Art Rolnick has been a big supporter of that from the Federal Reserve. Excuse me. And also, you talked about unemployment insurance, and I mentioned I am a small business owner. I used to work at Target back in the day, and I would really say that this is one of the issues we have to tackle beginning this session. There's some deadlines happening for employers to pay into this. I will say that back in 2013, I had a bill that passed that lowered the unemployment insurance rate to the lowest that we are able to have it, because we had a surplus and it was good times. So we didn't need to ask employers and businesses for more money. We had plenty to weather a storm. This storm has basically wiped out our reserves, and we are now looking at using the mechanism that we have to replenish the unemployment insurance. But in this case, we have an unprecedented pandemic. We know that we extended unemployment insurance to people and families who don't even qualify for it, because we wanted to make sure people had a safety net. So I think it's prudent that we fill it back up to the extent that we do. There's different money allocations. There's to the tune of $2 or $3 billion to do that. So on a surplus of 7.7, you do the math, it's a big chunk of our surplus. It's the right thing to do, but the question is, how can we get to an agreement with a divided legislature? But I think I'm pretty confident that we will, especially with the opportunity that we have with a surplus.
Yeah. Representative Howard, do you think that's something that can be done in a bipartisan way? You know, there's so many small business owners that are just struggling. As when I was reporting for Fox 9, it was just heartbreaking to tell those stories. And that was at the beginning of the pandemic. Now, 2 years later, I mean, some of these places, they're just not going to make it. What do you kind of say to some of those small business owners in your district?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, back to the start of this conversation, we need to focus and target our surplus on the folks who are most impacted. And so that's families, and that's also our small and smallest businesses. I'd like to see us, when we look at this UI issue, focus our relief on our truly small and smallest businesses. Those have been hurting the most. There's a lot of large businesses that have actually flourished and seen their profits soar during this pandemic. So I'm less concerned about focusing relief, especially while so many people and so many small businesses are hurting and the outcomes have been inequitable over the last year and a half. So my hope is that whether we're talking about economic assistance for families or for businesses, we're doing so in as a targeted way as possible, because even with a $7 billion surplus, it can go pretty quickly and you could use up a huge chunk of it pretty fast. And so we're going to have to do this in a targeted manner.
And that leads a little nicely into local bonding projects. What should the priorities be when it comes to how we spend our money on those? You know, there's infrastructure, transit, there's lots of things we could be looking at. Representative Elkins, what do you think our priority should be with bonding projects?
Well, locally here, we're pleased to learn yesterday that the governor's bonding proposal recommends funding the public health, public safety facilities in both Bloomington and Edina, which was good to hear. We've all been working hard to see that those two projects get into the legislative bonding proposals as well. And I think that infrastructure, that's what bonding is for. And so I'm right now serving on a legislative task force that's looking at ways that we can prevent what Senator Newman refers to as leakage from the Highway Trust Fund. It's like looking for the small change under the seat cushions to find more money to fund transportation. And we do, in fact, have a funding gap on projects like the 494 expansion, which is very important in our part of the world. And so making sure that MnDOT has the opportunity to fully fund all aspects of the 494 project. I'm hoping that we find some bonding money to plug those gaps as well. And the federal money will help on that. So,
Senator Franzen?
It's another opportunity. This is a bonding and public and policy session. It's not a budget session, but certainly with the surplus, we'll have to delve into a supplemental budget that's bigger than normal, a normal year. So, but bonding, we have an opportunity as well. There's some federal money coming from the infrastructure bill under Biden, President Biden, and we're going to have to pay in a down payment for reaping those monies to bring them to Minnesota. And I think that's a great opportunity, anywhere from $300 million just for Minnesota roads and bridges. And I think we need to look into that, make sure we don't lose that opportunity. That's a one-time. But then we also have needs. And what we typically do with bonding is look at asset preservation. Yes, there's some new projects, but asset preservation is really our role to make sure that government assets are continuing to be safe. The other opportunity that we know we have, and I met with some stakeholders on the housing issue, and I'm glad that the governor has some funding there in his proposal to add more affordable housing. It's more for, we have a gap between 40,000 and 60,000 units right now of what we need to be building to make sure people have a home and entry-level workers. So we're talking about teachers and police officers who can't afford to potentially live in Edina because they can't find an affordable home, entry-level home. So that is something that we need to look at, and what can we do to support it, not just through bonding, but other tax credits that we are looking into potentially supporting that. So I think housing, asset preservation, and definitely reaping in some of the federal money that's coming in.
Well, that's a perfect segue into a question we have from someone participating, from Jean Lee. She says, 15 years ago, mayors acknowledged the need to rehab aging homes. MHFA has funds not accessible to all with the need. Can you prioritize those receiving funds and grants as being those most in need to prevent loss of home, homelessness, expensive ripple effects of court action, including impact on their job and getting loans. She says it impacts the elderly with limited incomes. There should be no court action or legal expenses because of their situation. So I don't know if Senator Franzen, you'd like to answer that because you kind of just brought that up.
Yes, and I think Representative Elkins might want to chime in because he's working on some issues regarding regulations as well at the local level. So a lot of the stakeholders I mentioned, some of the in the housing private sector side have said there's too much regulation for building codes and PUDs, which plan unit developments, and certainly we need to figure out what the role of the state government to make sure there's an even playing ground so that you can actually in our suburbs that you're able to find a home that's safe and also affordable. And for the governor's proposal, he announced for $450 million in safe and affordable housing projects, including $250 million investment in housing infrastructure bonds to provide supportive housing. So this is more on the affordable side and not the private side, but certainly on the private sector side, I mean, but that's a way to fill in those gaps of people being able to find a home that they can stay in, and trying to find, you know, also through the tax code, there's many levers there that we can help property tax relief and tax cuts there. So I do envision that we're going to do something there, especially when we look at seniors and they have a fixed income and we know that their healthcare costs are going up. So we need to support our seniors and making sure that they stay in our communities.
Great. Representative Elkins, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, I should say, you know, Representative Howard is really our champion in terms of trying to find funding for, you know, both the supply side and the demand side with relief for rentals. The part I'm playing in this, building on my 20 years in planning and zoning as a city council member of planning commissioners, is zoning reform. There are too many places, especially in the Twin Cities, where it is illegal to build an affordable house, essentially, under the zoning laws. And so that's the bill that I would say. There's really two bills that I'm working on this year that I'm putting a ton of time into because they're so complicated. It's you know, housing and zoning reform, and then consumer data privacy, which is one I'm working on actively with the chamber as well. But definitely, there are too many institutional barriers to building affordable housing in Minnesota right now. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up like the major regions on the coast where people are fleeing from California because they just can't afford to live there anymore. We don't want to do like that.
Yeah. Yeah, Representative Howard, would you like to kind of add your 2 cents? I know there's been some national articles saying Minneapolis kind of on that verge of becoming like the New Yorks, the Seattles, you know, some of those bigger cities. How do we make sure people can buy a home?
I could spend the rest of our time just on this question, so I'll try to be brief, but I really think this is just such a vital question and challenge for us this session, and we're at kind of a make or break moment. Unless we start making significant investments and change the status quo, we are going to become one of those regions. And the stat that just always sticks in my mind is that our state right now spends 0.3% of its state budget towards housing. And when you look at how vital safe and stable housing is to every aspect of our lives and the state of our housing crisis, that is just unacceptable. I mean, because whether we're talking about our economic competitiveness with other states from a business sense, our racial equity gaps in our schools, health disparities, all roads really lead back to home. Even our public safety discussion, we could spend a lot of time talking about the intersection with safe and stable housing. So we need to change the game and start making significant investments and really have an all hands on deck approach, because it's going to take both the public sector, nonprofits, and private development to address our housing challenges. And our job at the legislature can be on one hand, on the bonding side. I do think we can do significant investment on public housing and use housing infrastructure bonds as one of our only tools to promote private investment and leverage public dollars for private investment in housing to build affordable housing that meets our needs. And so, but from a 30,000 foot view, we just need to break out of the status quo and invest more of our state dollars in housing. And the ripple effects will be felt in all other areas of the legislature and issues that we're trying to solve as well.
Great. Follow-up question here from somebody participating. for Mike. Can we do anything at the state level to prevent the legal suits against owners, occupied condos, so we can build more of those lower cost ownership options in our cities?
I'd love to, whoever asked that question, to follow up individually and to understand more. I haven't heard that issue come up too much. And so I'd love to hear more and have a dialogue with whoever asked the question.
Great. Well, let's quickly segue to redistricting. I want to make sure we get that in. I think that's a big topic here. It happens only once a decade. So do we think we can get this done, make this work? I know it's obviously, can become controversial. Senator Franzen, what are your thoughts on how we figured this all out?
Well, the courts will figure it out, and that's been historic in our state. And I had one of several bills to take that job away from the legislature. We are so biased in the legislature. It's all about self-preservation. So to give it to us to come together, especially in a divided legislature, it's almost, it would be a miracle that we would actually have a map by February 15th and get it signed by the governor. So that's the reality, the political reality. So we'll hear a few, maybe by the end of February, between February 15th and I hope by the end of February, we'll see maps that are going to be drafted by the courts. And they are taking, approach. There are different maps out there. Certainly the Democrats and the Republicans have sent out maps, and some of them have been admitted as evidence in court. And there's been a lot of work, and the Supreme Court has a panel that's been looking at this and working behind the scenes to get ready for us not to have a map sent to them from the legislature. So I would really hope that in the future we take this function away from the legislature and give it to a non-partisan, unbiased task force or group of people that can actually do this for us and not have this delay.
Senator Wickland, do you agree with that action?
Yeah, that's reality right now. We've seen some work go on in the legislature. The House has convened a committee and they've put forward a map. The Senate has done a more reduced version of that, but they've also put it forward. But reality is that coming to agreement is not something that's very viable, just with the way our legislature is set up. And so the courts have been, the court panel has been working for many months, and they've been taking a lot of input from a lot of people, and they will do the work as they see fit to come up with the fairest maps that they, according to principles that they've established. And I wish that we would have been able to have a more open and transparent discussion about these principles that should go into making up the maps. I think we could, the legislature could contribute if we were able to have open and transparent discussion about what fairness means and what should go into making up a map. But the current reality is that isn't what has been happening. So I think that we're facing, just as Senator Franzen said, we need to see in a few weeks what's put forward. But I'm not sure if we're going to ever be set up. It would be nice in the future if we could perform the task are assigned. So,
Representative Elkins, you're nodding your head in agreement.
Yeah, it's we had two bills this session, the last session as well, to establish a nonpartisan redistricting committee, which we could have easily passed, but Senator Mary Kiffmeyer controls the State Government and Elections Committee in the Senate, and she won't even hear the bills. It's a practical matter. We do have a nonpartisan redistricting committee. It's called the Supreme Court, and I think that knowing that process has worked pretty well for like 50 years in a row kind of takes the pressure off the legislature, the perceived pressure on the legislature to come up with a permanent reform. But yeah, in an ideal world, we would have the nonpartisan redistrict committee as actually established in law, like so many other states have already done.
Great. Well, I want to get to a few more questions that have appeared in the chat here. Robert Freeman asks, how should we address the issues with hospital capacity and healthcare workforce shortages? This is at unprecedented levels all across the country. Senator Franzen, how do we make this, how do we fix this? Obviously, healthcare workers are so burnt out, but they keep going. This is a really critical issue here.
Absolutely. And Senator Wickland and I have served on Health and Human Services for pretty much our entire time in the legislature since 2013. And we've seen, we've always had issues with our workforce in terms of getting and attracting workforce here. But obviously with the pandemic, we've had overworked and sick employees. So we've had to really go to triage. And what that meant for Minnesota is in the last few weeks, the governor has had to use his emergency fund to bring in nurses from wherever he can find them, quite frankly, because there is a shortage, and there's certainly people who we just don't have the capacity at this point. And I think that's going to be one of the issues we're going to look for in this session. And how do we support our workers? How do we support our nurses who are burnt out, tired, and doing heroic work? And one of the bills that one of our colleagues is doing, Senator Klein, who's also an ER doctor, has put forward a bill to really hold people accountable for committing, backlash to healthcare workers. Some of them are being attacked. Some of them are being, we called them heroes at one point. I've heard stories that I'm not even going to repeat here that have been horrific of how we Minnesotans have treated our healthcare workers. We're in it together. We cannot get out of this pandemic until we realize that we depend on each other. And I think it's going to be a very important conversation in our legislature. But it's not just about money. It's about, again, when we talked about public safety, is about uplifting these workers who are doing amazing work in our communities. And we have to realize that we cannot live in a healthy and safe community without them. And we have to give them a morale boost. And I would say the priority in our caucus will be the frontline worker pay issue that we left on the table this last fall. And it's been highly politicized. Our workforce needs a morale boost now more than ever. And it was $250 million that we agreed back last session, and to work over the summer. That price tag has gone up because it's gotten worse, and by twofold, if not more. So I think we really have to come to agreement that these workers have earned this support. So I think that's one of the solutions, but it's going to be more comprehensive. So we look forward to working with hospitals, nurses, PCAs, nursing homes, and all of the above who are really struggling with this workforce issue and how it interacts with the hospitals.
Oh, absolutely. Senator Wickland, I wanted to have this question for you. This is from Heather Starks. She says, while school districts have received a lot of federal funding, we still have many pressure points: special education funding, English language learner funding, staffing shortages, lack of diverse staff. How can the state legislature help school districts in this session?
Thanks. I think that we do have a lot of work yet to do. We passed a substantial education budget last year. It did increase funding for schools, but it hasn't been enough. And we haven't addressed some of the most important areas that would go towards creating better and stronger schools, which is some of the things that Heather mentioned, supporting our English language learners better. That has been an area that we have not been adequately funding for quite some time. Also, I think just the whole notion of supporting students with the roles of counselors and social workers, and as well as the special ed personnel, all have been critically underfunded. So this would be a year that it would be great if we could put more resources, more funding towards those particular roles. I have supported bills in the past that would support the school social worker roles and counselor roles, because we're way behind the rest of the country in terms of supporting the work with resources. And so, that type of thing would be something I'd support this session as well. I just wanted to make one other comment about in terms of hospitals and healthcare. I hope that we also take collectively our role seriously in terms of facing this crisis that we're in right now, and in terms of, doing our part to get vaccinated and reduce the pressure on our healthcare system. So I think that is also a big part of how we're going to get through this. So those are my comments about education and healthcare. Thanks.
Great. Well, I'd like to just take the last few minutes here to kind of go around the panel and just any sort of closing remarks, thoughts looking forward to the session starting, how we can maybe work together and get things done. We're still the only divided legislature in the country. So Representative Howard, I'll kind of start with you. We'll just go around the panel quick before we close things out.
Thanks. I appreciate the discussion and the ground we could cover. It's the challenges that our state are facing are so immense. We could do a forum for 3-4 hours and still not get to everything. And so for folks that did have questions that didn't get answered, or something was discussed and you want to learn a little bit more, feel free to reach out to me. Reach out to any of us in your Bloomington representatives and senators, and we'd love to have a conversation. I think this session is one where we need to both sort of have optimism that we have the ability to work together and do a lot of good work, and also a sense of urgency. The anxieties and the stressors that families are facing are real and every day. And so the more that we can center what our community members are facing at the legislature and bring their voices to the table, when frankly, it feels like folks, might feel like they're losing a bit of control. So we need to empower our citizens and our small businesses. And what gives me hope is that we do have a track record in the state of coming together and working together and getting things done. And if there's ever a session to do so, it's this one. And so look forward to hopefully a productive 2022 session.
Great. And I stand corrected. Virginia is now also a divided legislature. So I want to make sure the former journalist in me wants to make sure I'm accurate. Representative Elkins, any just closing thoughts on when we get started next week in the legislature?
I think we're looking at some bruising battles on a lot of issues. But I've discovered that there are some issues that we can still work productively across the aisle on, and I find it's a lot more fun to work on those issues actually. So you look at things like a reform of the state's information technology operations. Representative Bonner from Maple Grove and I work very well with our Republican colleagues, Jim Nash, Eric Lucero, and others on IT reform. We serve on the IT-related subcommittees, and a group like that, we come to a consensus and we forward recommendations, which are frequently adopted. On my housing affordability zoning reform bill, Representative Jim Nash, Senator Rich Draheim, Republican senators, I work very, very closely with them on that issue. Jim Nash and I appeared on Almanac together. The same issue. Our millennial children can't afford to buy their first home, and there's not new starter homes being built. If you go out into the newly developing suburbs and look at what's available out there, everything's $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, and when that's the only thing that can be built in gated communities without the gates. That's something that we can come together on. So, and the data privacy issue that I'm working on is also bipartisan. So there are some things like that have not become, at least have not yet become partisan yet, that we can continue to work on across the aisle.
Great. Senator Wickland?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the time today and appreciate being able to talk about a few of the issues that we're going to be facing and hear from my colleagues. And I hope that any of the members of the audience who have questions, I'm certainly open and would like to continue to have the discussion about these topics, particular issues, policy issues. I hope you'll email me and get in touch. We also have easier access by virtual meetings now to set up times to talk, and so that's one thing that I think is a positive. We can fit more of those conversations in. So I look forward to that, and look forward to having the discussions with my colleagues about these key issues, whether they're across the aisle or not. We care about people across Minnesota and our community. and we want the best for our state going forward. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. And Senator Franzen.
Thank you to the chamber. I am actually a small business chamber member of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, so I do see the value of the work that you all do on behalf of businesses of all shapes and sizes. And we really do need to support our businesses and support our workers, and they go hand in hand. So the work we'll do this session is going to be focused on getting back on our feet, getting our economy roaring. And actually, we're in a really good state. When we have a surplus, that means our economy is in good footing. So we look to you for your input, your emails. I just got an email from, I don't even know if this person's a constituent, but they basically said they appreciate that we read their email, that we responded, and that we're listening to them, even if it takes a little longer. So feel free to email, call, text. We'll be there to support you and get you the answers you need to get through this next phase of COVID, but also building us up for the future. Thank you again for all you do.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us. I had a great discussion. I thought this was fabulous. Grace, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks so much, Christina, and thank you to our legislative panel for your time. Like Representative Howard said, we could spend hours on these events, but we managed to fit in a lot of information. And like everyone said, if you have any follow-up questions, would like to get in touch with these legislators, feel free to get in touch with us at the chamber. We're always happy to facilitate that. And I also believe we'll be including contact information for everyone on the panel in your post-event email as well. As I mentioned earlier, this was the second of 3 session previews we are hosting. The third and final one will be this coming Friday, January 21st. This will be the Minneapolis session preview, and that will be virtual. And you can find the recording from our West Metro session preview up on our YouTube page. We also have the 2022 Breakfast with the Mayors in partnership with the St. Paul Area Chamber coming up on Thursday, January 27th. That will be a hybrid event, as well as our 2022 Minneapolis Regional Chamber annual meeting, which is also going to be hybrid, and the in-person portion will be held at the Fillmore, Minneapolis on Wednesday, February 23rd. There will be registration links to all of these and our upcoming programs in your post-event email. Again, thank you to Comcast, CenterPoint Energy, Mortenson, Xcel Energy, Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, MRA, the Management Association, Target, US Bank, and Finance and Commerce for your support. Thank you to you all for being here. Have a great rest of the day. Stay warm, and we'll see you next time.